Hey everybody, David from Axe Annex here, and today I have a very special show for you. All the way from Nordic Weasel Games, it's Ivan Sorensen! Yay! Alright, without further ado, let's hear from Ivan.
Hey, this is Ivan Sorensen of Nordic Weasel Games, and I'm here with my friend Cool Canadian Dave, and we are going to answer some questions. I'm going to answer some questions. He's going to ask them. They came from all over the internet, and they were kind of about everything related to gaming and Nordic Weasel Games. So I hope everyone enjoys listening to this and gets their question answered.
So the first section will be, what formed you? Our first question is, what's behind the name Nordic Weasel?
Yeah, so that's actually like really simple. So the Nordic part is literally just because I'm from Denmark. War game and miniatures gaming stuff is so like heavily associated with like the United States and the UK and like Canada a little bit, like heavy gear and stuff. So I just figured that pointing out that I was Scandinavian would be kind of cool. Nordic was it? And Weasel is from an old Warhammer 40k short story called Deathwing about the Dark Angel Space Marines. So they all have like these kind of faux Native American like names. And one of them was Weasel Fierce, and I thought that was so cool when I was like 15. So I just adopted that. And then when, you know, in those days when you were on the internet, you had to have like your call sign or whatever, your nickname. So anywhere I went on like chat rooms and forums, I was always like Weasel or Weasel Fierce, and then it just stuck as Weasel. So it literally is just a Warhammer reference, and it's just stuck for this long. Like I have had friends in the past who would, in phone conversations, call me Weasel because that's just how they knew me. So yeah, there's nothing more to it than that. So Warhammer and where I was born.
Perfect. I don't think you can get any more elaborate than that.
And that was a question from Discord.
Yeah. Next question, also from Discord. How did you get started writing war games? Have you found that beginner publishers publishing their first product should make it free, pay for what you want, or paid?
So that's a 2-for-1. So started writing war games. This is gonna be a little bit cheesy because I think a lot of people who like write games they have this story that when they were kids they were just kind of surfing around. But really, there's like two things I very vividly remember. One was when I was a kid. It took a long time before we had like a computer or anything at home. I can play video games. Somehow I talked because I thought video games were like magic. So I talked my parents into buying me copies of whatever. It was some Danish Nintendo magazine. It may have been like a translated like Nintendo Power. I don't know. And I would like look at the games that we're talking about, and I remember very distinctly there was one of them that had an article on Street Fighter 2. And it had like lists of all the characters and all the moves. And since I couldn't play Street Fighter 2, we certainly couldn't afford a Super Nintendo. Remember making my own little like dice game with all the moves. So you could pick different moves, and they all had a different number you had to roll to hit on the dice, and they did a different amounts of damage. And I'm sure it didn't actually work or was any fun to play, but I distinctly remember like making that. And the first that was like a real war game was a copy of White Dwarf, and I want to say it was like 182. And it had a battle report between like Ultramarines, Imperial Guard, and Orcs. And at that time, I had played some board games. We had played role-playing games. We had played like Hero Quest and Space Crusade and that stuff. And I read this, and I thought I could recognize like the Space Marines and the Orcs like from Space Crusade. Like we knew what those were, and this was just the most magical thing I'd ever seen. So I took out all my figures on my Space Crusade box, and I like copied all the words I could like find in the battle report that were like for special weapons or abilities and stuff. And then I like made my own. I basically like made my own like little Warhammer game I could play with my Space Crusade figures. And again, I'm sure it was like hot garbage. I think I had more fun like writing it than I ever did like playing it afterwards. But that's like literally the start. After that, it was once we got really into playing like proper miniatures gaming. There was just a couple of us who were always like coming up with games and ideas. We would create our own units, and we would a couple of times try to create our own games, most of which were bad. Because when you start out doing anything, it's probably bad. That's a start. It was literally just like a thing I've always done. On what you should do as a beginning publisher, that's a really The question. In my experience, I think, when people have asked me this, like privately, I've said you should charge whatever you think it's worth, and it's probably worth slightly more than you think it is. I think there's a tendency for people when they download a game for free, they don't really value it all that much. Not necessarily. There's some exceptions. Like Fubar is a really fun game. A lot of people play, and that's like super free. But I think a lot of times, if a game is free, and especially if it's like a larger game for some reason, like people tend to just kind of dismiss it, like, "Oh, okay, it's trash," you know. So I don't think if you want people, the biggest problem you're going to have starting out is that nobody knows who you are. You don't have a name to trade on. You don't have any like reputation from other games you've made. You're just one more person posting their Spaceman game on Wargame Vault. And I think making it free, I feel like a lot of times it'll kind of put you in that like bargain bin bucket where the only people who will download the game are like weirdos who like reading rules for fun. So in my opinion, you should charge something. You don't have to charge a lot. You obviously have to be realistic. If you're nobody and you have like 50 pages of black and white text with no pictures, you can't charge $20. But in my opinion, throw a couple of bucks price tag on there. Also, in my opinion, because I've done this for like beta testing and stuff, where I just find if I charge $1, like I get way better feedback than if it's free. I don't know why, but so yeah, if you're starting out, in my opinion, once you have something that's like presentable, be honest with yourself. Make sure that it's not. It can be a little jank when it's an indie game, but it has to be like usable. It has to be complete. It has to cover all the things. And yeah, like charge a couple of dollars for it. I think you'll just be better off, and I think you'll get much more serious like responses.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question is also from Discord, and I think you basically answered it. But I want to add, when is this game coming back? The first game you designed.
Yeah. So after some negotiations about the rights, it turns out that Capcom apparently is a big company these days. So they said something on millions of dollars, and I don't got that kind of money. So I'm going to take that as the first game I designed that that was like played by real people that weren't just like my friends who couldn't say no. And that was Fast and Dirty, which was designed honestly kind of as a like Stargrunt 2, but better, with like youthful overconfidence. There were some things in Stargrunt 2, which kind of was the state of the art at the time for like generic, like non-miniature specific, like sci-fi. And there was some things in there that just kind of needed a new version, a new update. So, and I had some ideas for like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't this be cool? So I just kind of like threw it together over a summer. It was just after I'd moved to the States, and I couldn't legally work yet because I didn't have my permit, or work authorization, whatever they call it. So I had ample time to like make a game, and it ended up like kind of catching on. Like every now and again, I still get like a couple of emails every year for people saying like, oh, they either like found the PDF online somewhere, or they like dug it back out of a drawer, have been playing it. So yeah, Fast and Dirty. That's the first game I designed that was like read and played by like people, humans.
Humans who loved it.
Mostly, yeah.
The final question in this section also comes from Discord. How has Lone Wolf influenced your solo gaming mechanics and world-building choices?
Yeah, so I think I'm on record being a pretty big Lone Wolf fan. So for those who are not familiar, Lone Wolf was a series of, back in them days, we had what was called solo like game books. Sometimes people will call them choose your own adventure books, and I think they were more popular over here in the States, and I don't know if they were a thing in Canada.
I feel like I have seen them, but they were not as popular as the Fighting Fantasy or the Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah, maybe it's like an Anglo thing, because yeah, like Fighting Fantasy was like huge in we got those in Denmark. Lone Wolf, Bloodsword, there was a bunch of those series, and most of them were like out of the UK. The Lone Wolf was kind of unique from those series in that it was like a full game you could play through, and there was like 30 books of them, and you could take your character like through each of them. And there's something that I'm very, very fond of. I don't know to what extent it influenced my mechanics choices. Because I don't know how many of them are necessarily like applicable. So I think in some like very broad ways, like Lone Wolf there were always multiple ways to like get past a particular situation. So it wasn't as locked in that you had to have the like diamond key or whatever. Like fighting fans, you would almost just die if you didn't have like the 7 items you needed at the end. Um, so I think some of that, but I think for world building, it definitely was like a big influence. Both Lone Wolf had this vibe of being very modest fantasy. It always had a very like realistic, like lived-in vibe. Because you would have like crazy magic stuff, but then at the same time, you would also have just like normal people in a town, like living and doing normal people things, and it always felt very like vivid to me. And that's something that I've carried through in like sci-fi games, or both in sci-fi but also in fantasy games I've done. This feeling that like there has to be like a human element to it, otherwise I tend to kind of like tune out a little bit. So yeah, I think that's for Lone Wolf. That's kind of how it influenced me. Like years and years after the fact, it's a thing I've kind of like returned to many years later.
It would definitely be hard to write your own rules if you were tuning out through them.
This is true. This is true.
All right, so that concludes that section. The next one we're moving on to is game design. This question comes from... Oh, yeah, the meaty stuff. That's right. So this one comes from Discord. What's the process of creating a new game? Not a new theme for existing rules. Do you start with the mechanics, the theme, the fluff?
Yeah, a lot of times it is actually the mechanics. I tend to be very mechanically minded. A lot of times, a lot of games have really started with like a very specific mechanic, and I'll try to like put things around it to see if I can build it out and if this has like enough legs to become a thing. So like one of the first mechanics for what is now the 5 parsec system, the like modern version of it, was the turn sequence of rolling dice and assigning them to characters, and if it's over or under your reactions, that determines when you go. And or like for like 5-minute Normandy and 5 core, it was the combat like dice system of rolling 1s and 6s and having shock dice and kill dice. So most of the time it starts with a mechanic like that, and I'll start like, okay, so now I have this piece that's like the turn sequence, and let's put a combat system on that, let's put movement around that. You just kind of start building it up, and at some point you kind of realize whether sometimes you'll realize the mechanic is too confining, it's not going to do what you want, or it's not enough to like carry a game. And in that case, sometimes it just goes in the bin. Like for everything that gets published, I throw out like 8 more. And sometimes the mechanic does hold up. So yeah, most of the time it starts with the mechanic. Sometimes I will have thought of the mechanic because it's in relation to a specific thing I'm trying to do. So like with Laser Storm, for example, which is, we're going to do some deep cuts here, just so people will go to Wargame World and buy all this crap. With Laser Storm, like it was like a challenge to myself. Like, can you write a game that doesn't have any markers on the table and no like tracking? So everything had to like fit back into that. Sometimes, yes, or like KPS, the goal was like a skirmish game where it's like a true skirmish. Like each figure is one man; they're not abstracted out to represent like a group or anything. So sometimes it is a theme. Most of the time, it's mechanics, and the game has to have something I can kind of like feel interested in with the mechanics for it to kind of work.
Would you say that the social system in Weasel-Tech is more fluff or theme?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on how you define it. To me, at least, theme is more like the feeling you get when you're playing the game. So I think the social system would be a theme. Fluff to me is more like when it talks about like a specific like mech type and its abilities or something like that. That's fluff to me. But maybe I'm using those terms wrong.
I think you got it right. Yeah.
I mean, it's my book, so I can have it be whatever I want.
That's right.
I think it's theme, and I think a lot of times, like that's what I'm kind of interested in, is how the mechanics can create the theme. You get a different feeling when you're playing. I think that's really important. So yeah, mechanics, and then the theme often descends from that, but sometimes they kind of go hand in hand.
And pretty much like never the fluff then. All right.
Yeah, not specifically, because I will admit, like, like the main setting I have is like unified space, which I enjoy like creating things for, but it was created specifically to be a game setting, so it kind of like it is secondary in some ways.
I agree with that. That's for sure.
So
It's lets you build into yourself. You don't have to worry about it
uh-huh.
plugging into the existing fluff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question, also from Discord. Roughly how much time of a development cycle is spent on the tabletop versus making calculations, scribbling design notes, and proper writing?
That is a great question, and one that's difficult to answer. So nowadays, I'm lucky enough that I have, a sort of people that I trust and who can provide like solid feedback, so I can get much more like test time. With playtesting, it's difficult because you can do a lot of playtesting yourself, and I think most, especially independent designers, like that's most of the design you do or testing you do is yourself or your friends, your gaming group. But the really valuable stuff is when it's people who you aren't there to explain it to them. They have to just rely on the text you gave them, and they have to figure out how the game works, and that's how that's like the moment of truth, right? So it's a little difficult to say. When it comes to math and stuff, calculations, determining odds and stuff, at this point, because I tend to work with D6s a lot, and because I've done it for so long, I usually have a pretty good eye for like how the math is going to work out. So that part isn't very long. And there are like websites and stuff you can go to, and they can help you figure out like odds of rolling specific stuff. So you don't have to do it like by head. I would say scribbling design notes is probably, it could be anywhere up to like a quarter of the time. I work a lot on notepads because I just think better with a pen and pencil or a pencil and paper. Proper writing is usually more once I like know what the game is going to look like. Once I've played through it enough times to know that there's something here, I can kind of sit at the keyboard and just like grind it out. And then the actual like development cycle is a lot of like discussing the mechanics with the people I trust to do that stuff with, listening to people who've read or played the game, what didn't work, what did like, making decisions about that. That's, if you had to put it in like percentages, I would say about 50% of it is that sort of like active development where you're like messing with the mechanics and you're putting it on the table and you take it back off. And the other half is all the other stuff. The writing, the design, the calculations, things like that.
The inner circle.
So, yeah, there's kind of a secretive inner circle who kind of get like a preview. It's not that exclusive. Well, it's exclusive, but they just kind of like, it's people that I know, like, who can keep their mouth shut and who can give kind of like unvarnished feedback. Like, they can tell me if something is stupid or if something doesn't work. So that's important.
That'd be an interesting outtake. All the stupid stuff.
I know, right? I think there's a couple of questions down there about outtakes.
I believe so. All right, let's see. The next question from Discord. This is actually quite tricky because you are very open about your design process here. But how do you decide which games to develop into second or third editions? What's your criteria for revisiting or reiterating a game? I'm sure a lot of folks would like to see updates to 5 Clicks or Starport Scum, for example, which we'll definitely see a little later. But how do you choose what to spend time on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two and a half things, I guess. One, well, I guess, yeah, it's multiple things. Part of it is that I have to just kind of be in the mood for it. I am professional enough that I can sit down and make myself develop something, but I also recognize if I'm really like burning for it, it'll be better. So a lot of times it's like, oh, okay, I have an idea, like I have something that I can do with this. It's I'm not a fan most of the time when it's something where okay, there's a couple of tweaks. There's like one new thing that we added, some things that are wrong that can be corrected. That'll just go like the PDF will get updated, Wargame Vault. But there's no point in making like a new edition. Like I'm a pretty strong believer a new edition should offer at least something, whether it's a facelift, whether it's like improving some of the rules, adding new sections, things like that. So part of it is that it has to be enough to kind of make it worthwhile. And sometimes that can happen kind of organically. Like when I did the Renegade Scout second edition, I originally didn't intend that it was going to be like a huge bunch of changes. It was just going to be like one or two things. And then when I got to work on it, I realized all these things like, oh, okay, like this works as it is, but here's like a better way of doing it, or here's a way of making it more interesting. And sometimes you can't do those until you've had it like out in the wild and people have like engaged with it and you can kind of see. So yeah, there has to be enough to make it worthwhile, and I have to like be into it at the moment. The third factor is there has to be like a commercial element to it. I do have to pay my rent. So sometimes it is like that's not always a huge factor. Like I'm working on updating like War Story very slowly, and War Story I think sold like 100 copies in its lifetime, and it'll probably sell 100 more. I'm gonna update it. Whereas, you know, like Starport Scum would be a big one, and I know what I want to do with it, but I have to like find like the moment where I'm like, okay, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna grind this out, we're gonna make it happen. So a little bit of like when I feel like it, some of what when I know what to do with it, and some of it just like financial like viability. For the Starport Scum fans, there is an alternate timeline where Starport Scum was the game that got a glossy book release instead of 5 parsecs. You can all like decide whether that timeline is better or worse than this one, but that could have happened.
I think everyone wears a goatee in that timeline.
In that timeline, MASH is still running.
Oh,
I know, right? Maybe a different cast. I think they're a little old now.
I do have one question, kind of related to this topic. The Bug Hunt Second Edition was kind of a test bed of rules, wasn't it, for an upcoming project?
So sometimes that happens. Nowadays, that tends to happen more on Patreon because I can use that. But yeah, so Bug Hunt was always like a weird thing because at the time I was experimenting with these little like standalone games, and some of it was like didn't make sense as a standalone. Like Salvage Crew was originally a standalone game, and it was a little too thin, a little too close to Parsec, so it got folded in as like a mission type. But Bug Hunt is very like accessible to people because you know, like it's Aliens or it's Starship Troopers or if you have some video games, it's Helldivers, right? Like it's very easy to explain to a person, and everyone gets it. So it's a great standalone. So the second edition was essentially both kind of like realigning it a little bit now that 5 parsecs was going to be a big deal, and also sort of teasing out a few things. And I don't know if I can say too much, but there will be some exciting stuff for Bug Hunt in the future.
Ooh.
So we got to throw a few teasers out here, right?
That's right.
I just talked about being commercially viable, so you gotta lure them in a little bit, show a little ankle.
Tasty stuff. All right. The next question also comes from Discord. I always hear that a key rule of game design is to know when to kill your darlings. So I am curious what mechanic or gimmick was the most painful to cut out of one of your games, and if there have been any that you were on the fence about for a while, but ended up keeping.
So this is the cutting room floor question. So yeah, there's always something that ends up getting cut. I don't usually have too much heartburn with it because most of the time, what I'll do when I sit down at the keyboard is I start out by taking a Word document or Pages because I use a Mac, and I will put all the headlines in. So there'll be a chapter called Movement, there'll be one called Combat, and for any like special feature I want, like if the game is gonna have like the social system, Weasel-Tech, I'll put in a chapter called Social, even if I don't know how it's gonna work yet, because then when I get there and as the game starts coming together and the core components start working, you can kind of fill in those areas. So I kind of like sketched out, like, here's like 20 things this game is going to have. And when it comes down to the last bit of it, you're going to reach a stage where either A, the book is big enough, and if you keep putting things in, it's going to be like too sprawling, too much. B, you're sick and tired of it, and either this game gets released or it's just not going to happen. Or you're realizing that some of the ideas you initially had, they just aren't going to work. The nature of the game changed, right? So at that point, I just start cutting chapters that I haven't done, or a lot of times I'll have like a page on my notepad, but they're not like fully. They're just sketched out enough they could become a system, and then they can be cut real easy. So a lot of times I don't really have heartburn about like cutting like chunks because they were not. The closer you get to the end, the bigger question mark there is for each of those. One that I wish I'll change the answer a little bit. One that I wish I could have kept or figured out is the infamous displacement rule. This was a rule from 5 Men in Normandy, and I think it was in the original 5 format. I remember. And the way it worked was I was really keen on this idea that when you were commanding your little like squad, you wouldn't necessarily know where everyone was. Like where your miniature is would be sort of like, okay, I sent this guy like over there to check out that house, but he might actually have like stopped short, or he might have gone around, or he might, And the way it worked was that if one of your miniatures was spotted for the first time, they would actually be moved like 1d6 inches in random direction. And it's one of those things that looked fine on paper, and then when people played it, it always ended up being weird because you would get like dudes like on the other side, like someplace they couldn't go, or like a guy who was obviously meant to be like a sentry, but he was like over in this place, and it all just ended up being all these like discussions of like, well, this is what it represents, and people didn't really like it. So finally, it was time to admit, like, okay, I can't write this rule to where like it makes intuitive sense to people what it means. So it's time to go, and it got cut. So, for one that was on the fence about, end up keeping. I'm trying to think. Funny enough, the version of the Weasel-Tech social system that went in was not what I had originally intended. But I couldn't. What I had originally intended was going to be a lot more sort of flowcharty, and I ended up realizing it would be a ton of work, and I didn't know if it would be all that fun. But I also, because the game is so like inspired by Macross, I knew like it had to be there. So I ended up like redoing it from scratch. And there was a moment, because it was the last thing done for that game. It was always planned, but it was the last thing that was actually finished. And there was a couple of moments just like where I was thinking like, is this really like necessary? And obviously like it's the thing that everyone like remarks on, so it was necessary. But that one almost didn't happen.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see Weasel-Tech without it.
Yeah, I think in that case there would have been much less to like for people to like latch onto. So, but yeah, that's the one that almost got away, I guess.
All right. Final question in this section also comes from Discord. What was the evolution behind the damage system in the 5-core descended systems over the years? Was it the design thinking that led to kill dice and shock dice not making it into modern iterations of the system? Of the system?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because it's this is a case where the answer of how those games fit together, it comes up quite a bit, and like by now, like so many people have like understood it in a different way that I'm inclined to just say that the way people understand it is the official way. So the like really brief history lesson is originally there was 5 Men in Normandy, and it was called that because you were supposed to play like half a squad, and it took place in World War II Normandy. Well, it's right in the title what you're supposed to be doing. And eventually, a couple of people asked. They wanted basically a generic version that just had like generic soldiers instead of being a World War II game. And because it was going to be like a stripped down, just a core game engine with no campaign and all this stuff, I decided to call it 5-core because it was the core of the 5-Men in Normandy system. So, and then later, like 5-core would grow up to become its own thing, like the Green Book and everything. It's a full, skirmish game. And the kill and shock dice were always part of that because I was very keen on this like one roll combat resolution where you roll the dice once and you don't have any follow-up rolls. The dice roll will tell you if the guy's pinned down, if he's running away, if he's wounded, if he's gone. But when I revamped, because the original 5 Parsecs was a expansion for 5-core, and it was kind of a glorious mess. When I was revamping it, I wanted to simplify it because my opinion at the time had shifted a little bit. I thought the game was 5-core was always meant as a 2-player game that you could play on your own. But with 5 Parsecs, it shifted to become a strictly like solo game. That was the purpose of it. And I thought that it had to be a little simpler and a little less fiddly. And I also thought at the time that in order for the game to get maybe a wider audience, more people like willing to check it out, it had to be a little more conventional. So I thought if the turn sequence with the reaction rolls was non-standard, then I should have a pretty standard like combat system, like roll to hit, roll to kill, right? So that was it was basically simplifying and adjusting to being a solo game. That was the reason for that change. And for the longest time, I always considered that, okay, like 5 Parsecs now is obviously not a 5-core game because it's not using that engine, but in people's minds it is. So now it is. You can't fight against language.
And not. No. All right. So that concludes this section.
All right. We got some meat and potatoes. Let's get some gravy.
Yeah. This is the how much can you reveal section, or
Ooh.
what do you plan for the future?
I am already scantily dressed, but mostly because it's 1,000 degrees.
Oh, geez, yes. All right. The first question comes from Discord. Would you consider having specific minis made for your games in the future?
I think anyone who writes games is lying if they don't say yes. The problem is because I'm demanding. And honestly, it's two things. One, I really, really dislike as a buyer of miniatures when a company does a range, but there's only like 2 squads available. Like, I want to have like an entire thing. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to buy them. And secondly, I tend to put a lot of focus on having like a lot of different poses. If I'm buying miniatures, I want to have at least like 3 or 4 poses in a bag if I can. And so there's a lot of companies that don't really like fit the bill because they wouldn't support an entire range of everything. Like if there was going to be a 5 parsecs range, and I think that's like the obvious one. Like there would have to be, 8 or 10 different types of squads. There would have to be a bunch of different character models. Like it would have to be a lot, and that's a lot of commitment. So would I consider it? Yes, but I would probably be like really demanding, and maybe it would be like miserable for like a miniatures manufacturer to work with me.
I can understand. I often
now if they were like,
sorry.
I was gonna say if they were like really cool, kind of like generic, like like they would have a little bit of like Mass Effect. Cool, they would sell to other people. People who play other games. And it would only be fair. Like 5 parsecs players have been buying the Stargrave minis so much. It would only be fair if the Stargrave guys were buying like 5 parsecs minis, right?
Yeah. Here's some minis for your core space.
Yeah, right. Core space is basically like at this point like the official like 5 parsecs expansion.
I was going to say, I always imagine the thing that would work best for miniatures for your games would be to create a dedicated box set. So it's like a little game within a game. So it's not Weasel-Tech, it's a themed game that uses the Weasel-Tech rules. Maybe it's its own specific scenarios, has its own theme of, miniatures.
Yeah, that would be really cool. So, yeah, that would be rad.
All right. The next question up from Discord. What's the next hardback release planned?
Yeah, so that comes into the questions. I don't... Okay, so here's the thing. When I'm working with the Overlords, they don't really like tell me that I can't say things, but at the same time, it's also, so it's not too much, because it's been mentioned before. There will be a 5 parsecs expansion hardback. Expansion 2, as we're recording this on August 17th, is in layout. I think they were waiting on like a few more pieces. I don't remember. But it's basically, the text is done, it's tested, it's done. Expansion 3 I'm working on currently, that's mostly like folded up. And the idea is once those 3 are done and out in PDF, there will be a hardback like bundle version. So all 3 expansions plus like a piece of bonus content will come out as a hardback. Because then it could have the same like page count and the same dimensions as the 5 parsecs rulebook. So it would look really cool having the rulebook and then like, I don't know what we would call like the compendium or something. In addition to that, there are 2 hardback games that we have been talking about. One will be a licensed property that it's a small license, and I don't think I'm allowed to say what it is. It was one I wasn't familiar with prior.
Ooh.
And the other will be a game of my own creation, a new 5 parsecs. If I say experience, does that sound like super corporate?
I'll allow it.
All right, an adventure, a endeavor. It'll be a new type of campaign with its own new like structure, new things to do. So it'll be basically a brand new like standalone game that will exist alongside From Home.
So similar to the Bug Hunt in concept.
Yeah, in principle. And it will have some more like military stuff as well. But I can't say. The time frames on these things are like pretty long. Like from the time like I have a finished manuscript through like layout and editing and going to the printers and print approved, like that's a long process. I can't unfortunately give like oh, the question didn't ask when, it said what. Okay,
Yeah.
I've answered it.
But if you
Yeah.
say what it's going to be, people want to know when. And the
Yeah,
worst thing you can do
right.
is answer when, because probably
Oh
it's not
god,
going to be
yeah.
that time.
No, it will not. That's terrible.
All right. Next question from Discord. Do you ever consider revisiting or adding bits of content to your older titles?
Oh, so this I feel like this is a question from somebody who is newer. Because I think like second edition, like 5 leagues, I think we went through like 20 updates. Two of them that were big enough, they honestly could have been like second editions. So yes. I will say what can be a stumbling block is a lot of the really old titles were done in LibreOffice, and it's a fair amount of work to go get those converted over to what I use now, which is Apple Pages. You have to converting them over. There's no way of just directly converting the files, and the format gets chewed up. So you have to almost like do the whole thing from scratch. But yes, old games do get updated. I'm currently working on an older title that's being updated, and I have. It's one of the things I do want to spend more time on now that my sort of like work schedule has shifted a little bit with writing for the Overlords. So I want to spend more time on like going back and updating like a bunch of titles.
Bet you can't tell us what it is, but what's the theme of this title?
Oh, the one I'm updating.
Yeah.
I can actually say it's just a trench hammer.
Oh, okay.
So the squad hammer derived like World War One game. I've been working on a different project, but that ended up being like, oh, okay, I can update this. And because it's such a like niche thing, I can test out things to see if they would work in Squad Hammer. So yeah, it's just an update for that. It'll be pretty good, and I think there'll be some interesting things to consider for Squad Hammer.
Sweet. That sounds exciting.
Mhm.
Next question. Oh, sorry. Go
ahead.
Everyone.
I was going to say, everyone likes painting World War One guy. They don't know it yet, but they do.
They are awesome.
Yeah, gotta get those red pants.
All right, so the next question from Discord. When is Weasel Con?
Well, whenever Denny's will give us a gaming table. So if somebody who's listening is a second night shift assistant manager at Denny's, hook us up. All we need is like 2 tables we can put together and just keep the pancakes rolling. For those who are not Discord fans, Weasel Con has become like the unofficial name for like a hypothetical future like Nordic Weasel convention where people would presumably sit around and like solo game and then go out for dinner. Some sort of gaming meetup. Now that like we're not all like dying of COVID anymore, some sort of gaming meetup is something I've been like thinking about and trying to figure out like what's a way to do it that doesn't involve me like fronting like 10 grand for renting like a building or something. So
your old convention would definitely be tough, but you know you could always piggyback on another one.
Yeah, there's that. You can find, get yourself a little corner in like another convention, or you can find like, rent a smaller like facility. Because, realistically, it'll be like, 20, 30 people. So you get, something could happen, and it's something I want to look into in the fall.
Denny's. It's what's for breakfast.
Yes. Heck yeah.
And there's always the burning question from Discord. When is Fantasy Knight Pike Sword?
Yes, I know. I feel really bad about that one because I have, at various points, it's been like close to completion. So part of the holdup has been that it's one of the titles that the Overlords may be interested in, and if they are, there's some shifts in like what we would want to do with it because it would be probably tied a little closer to 5 leagues. Like the mechanics are kind of similar anyway, so being able to like transfer characters would be really cool. And obviously, like, you would have to be able to play, like, the races and the creatures from one game to the other. Whereas when I was working on it, that wasn't really, like, the intent. It was always meant to be kind of its own, like, weird thing and rely more on, like, mythology and stuff. So it's kind of up in the air what's going to happen with it. What is probably ultimately going to be happening, and this is what I've been laboring on, is that if what is more likely, instead of an expansion, it'll just be, like, KPS second edition, and it'll just have the fantasy stuff built in. and people can play fantasy, because then you can do like mythic medieval stuff, like if you want to have like your Vikings, but then they like find a bunch of like undead or something. And you could do like full blown fantasy. You can do so. Yeah, I don't know. I feel bad about it, but
Well, it's time comes when it comes. That's for sure.
mhm.
Interesting. Might warrant its own second edition. All right. So
More
also,
swords.
sorry,
More swords.
more swords, less knights.
Yeah, the knights are expensive. You can just buy the sword. You don't have to buy the whole knight.
So here's our last question from Discord in this section. When is 5 Core 4?
Hi, Chris. So the answer there is the same. This is another title the Overlords may be interested in, either on its own or as a vessel for some of their licensed stuff to like hang a miniatures game on. So, also my plans for what I wanted to do with it have shifted a couple of times, and I'm still juggling what is the best way. I know it's been a long time since I talked about that. But 5 Core specifically is a game that's like, that was kind of like the, at the risk of being like cheesy with it, that was kind of the game that like made Nordic Weasel as a company. So it's something that I want to get like absolutely right when I do it. And I kind of know the debate is basically between doing something that's more bold and drastic, like changing a bunch of rules to what I think would be the best possible game now, versus keeping it pretty close to the original and just kind of doing the little things. Tweak, like, here's, like the status effects can get a little too convoluted, stuff like that. So it's kind of the decision of doing like the more faithful, just update, update the visuals and stuff like that, more examples, more diagrams, or do like a whole new like edition where it's much more dramatic. So the when is, well, whenever.
Well, it's very interesting though that it's considered by the overlords as a an engine. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, in a way, it was always kind of meant to be. So it's interesting that it finally like might come around to that.
Fulfilling its own destiny.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're moving on to Facebook, the 5 Leagues group. And of course,
these questions all coming like directly from Zuckerberg.
Directly from Zuckerberg.
Big fan of the show.
He wants to know about 5 clicks. Have you anything in mind? Cheers.
Yeah. Yes, in the sense that I know what it will look like. The problem there is more one that I need to like just be really into it to do the. It was always meant to be like chapter 1, chapter 2. There was supposed to be 3 chapters. So the idea for the second chapter would be that you go further into. This is where all the weird post-apocalyptic monsters and like kind of like supernatural stuff happens. So like stranger monsters and strange events and stuff that happens, and you go and you get better loot and better weapons and stuff. But I need to I just haven't felt like the energy to really like do it yet. So it'll happen I know people have been kind of waiting for that, but it's one of those things I just have to like burn for it when I do it. So it'll happen when it happens.
And the next question is a follow-up, I guess, of sorts, from 5 Leagues Facebook group. Will there be a hard copy version of 5 Clicks from the Zone?
There could. It has come up in discussion. I didn't originally mention it because to me, like, it would be too close to, since they already have Wasteland Warfare, which has way more name recognition. But it has been discussed. That's all I can say. There's not a specific plan right now, but possible ?
The next question also comes from the 5 Leagues Facebook group. Will you be releasing fishing rules for 3rd edition?
So I think the fishing, I have started going back to some of the 2nd edition material that was done on Patreon. A lot of those small expansion came that way, and updating those. So at some point I'll tackle the fishing. I was told by one player that it was obvious that they were written by somebody who hates fishing. So maybe I need to watch there's those fishing networks on like cable TV where it's just like fishing videos all day. So maybe I need to sit down and watch that until I like fishing again.
Well, maybe you just need a fishing expert in the inner circle.
Yeah, maybe if any of you are like incredibly tedious and like getting up early in the morning, hit my email and I will hook you up with the game design plan of your life.
Facebook 5 Leagues group. Do we have a rough idea on when we will get rules for mounts and air combat?
Mounts, soon. Probably expansion 3, if I'm honest, because expansion 2 is shaping up to be mountain themed.
Mhm.
The holdup with the mounts, because it's not that difficult to just write like, okay, combat rules for like being mounted on the battlefield. The problem is that there's a lot of like other things you have to key into it. Because you have to go through, look at the weapons. What weapons can you use when mounted? You have to look at the scenarios. Can you ride your horse in a dungeon? What counts as a dungeon? And you have to do this with the enemies as well, because now you have to account for like some enemies might not use mounted characters, but then do they need to be adjusted for that? Some do use mounted, cavalry, but can they bring their horses into a dungeon? So there's a little more to it than just like putting the rules for it. But yeah, probably expansion 3. I know everyone wants horses. Air combat in 5 leagues. I'm gonna say no on that one, unless I get a really cool idea, like flying eagles versus like bat riders or something. That would be pretty rad.
Make your own Dragonlance saga.
The sound I just got was my lawyer wanting me to say no. We are doing nothing of the sort, and we are no threat at all to anyone's copyright.
All right. Facebook 5 leagues question. Any plan for an expansion for more skills and or like Hopes of Glory?
So for those who don't know, Hopes of Glory was the second edition expansion, which was focused on like mercenary adventures. So it was very like Black Company themed. Yes. So one of the things, if you weren't along in 5 League's second edition, skills were more like bespoke special abilities. And they ended up becoming kind of sprawling and difficult to use because there were just a lot of them, and there were a lot that had been added by expansions. So the skill system got like grinded down into the much simpler like proficiency system we have now, which I think most people would agree is a lot easier to work with. Instead, what you do now is if you've completed a quest yet, you will notice you get like a special quest skill. And that's kind of the thing going forward. So expansion 1 has, I think, 6 new, I forget the number, but there's like 5 or 6 new like quest skills you can earn. So you'll be incentivized to like play each like, the idea for the expansion is that they will each be different regions of the world. They'll have organizations to join, monsters to fight, new things to do, and new like specific skills and items to get new types of spells and stuff like that. So yes, there will be new skills. Hopes of Glory and a military expansion specifically, that is a maybe. I would like to do like a war-torn region to adventure in, but I haven't planned that far ahead.
Sweet. And this Reddit question up next is kind of related to this. Are you planning on any expansions to 5 leagues? Yes, I'm guessing. I am really enjoying my campaign and would love further content. So skills are coming.
Yeah, so expansion 1 is already done. It is undergoing layout. Again, I think they're waiting for like, there was like a couple pieces of character art we needed. So it'll take place in the desert realm, and it'll be heavily focused on undead and like skeletal monsters. If you have like skeletal, there's a lot of like skeleton like animals and stuff you'll have to fight. You'll get to learn a new type of magic. There's an organization you can join. It's really cool. And the idea, like I said, is each expansion will be a different region of the world, with number 2 probably being a mountain region. And I didn't realize like how many people went to dwarves. So when the book came out, everyone was like, "We want dwarves. Why can't we play as dwarves? These creatures are stupid. Give us dwarves." So it'll definitely be dwarf themed.
Your inner circle led you astray.
Yeah. So the story was when we were talking about the races, because like we wanted to put in like more non-human characters. Everyone kind of wanted that. And the idea was like, okay, well, they're going to have to be something that's a little unique. I want to do something that's kind of like cool and me. But we're going to do like one that's like a fantasy race. And I just thought it would be funnier if it was halfling, because like halfling miniatures aren't like that. You can get some nice ones, but they're not like, the big seller for any company. So it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like suddenly like all these guys get like orders for halfling minis? And I made them good too. Like halflings are really cool. They get like a ranged attack bonus, and missile fire is really effective. So like they're a really strong character.
Well, if you had included dwarves, people would have asked where the halflings were. So
Yeah, like all right, we just gotta have like short dudes. Like that's the thing.
The next question comes from Board Game Geek. How many mystics can a warband have? Page 15 of the 3rd edition rulebook states that you can pick a hero if you want a caster in your warband. Does that imply you can only have one caster, mystic, in your warband?
That is the original intention. A couple of people on Facebook have told me that they played with 2 or more mystics and said it didn't really like unbalance the game. I suspect it'll make it slightly easier. But the game is like, I think it's generally like recognized that it's fairly difficult in the beginning, so I don't think it breaks anything. If it's important to you what I intended when I wrote it, you're supposed to have one mystic in your warband, period. But yeah, do what you like. If you recruit a character, actually, here's the official answer. This is the official answer that you should all like write in your rule books. If you have a really cool mini of a second mystic, you can have one in your warband. But only if you have a cool mini.
And you have to post a picture.
Yes, you have to post a picture to the Discord. Otherwise, he's not official, and you can't play him.
Sorry, guys.
Or her. Yep, that's the rules.
All right. Next question, also from Board Game Geek. The new expansions will all be released as PDFs only, and then over time, they will be gathered into a printed book at a later time? I would also love to know if there are plans to do any crossover rules between 5 leagues and 5 parsecs.
So I think we answered the first question already. Yes. Mm-hmm. The plan is, because the expansion size we agreed was best is about like 45-ish to 50 pages, they are a little too thin to make a print book of. So what we're going to do is wait until we have 3 and then add a additional piece of content. And then it'll be a book kind of on the size of the rule books. And they'll get a print version. So, yeah. For the crossover rules, nothing planned. I know there's all kinds of stuff you could do. I just don't have any plans for it. Never say never, but not really. And my like fantasy tastes are like extremely prosaic and traditional, so it's not really something like burn for. Maybe, but like all lowercase letters and like a small question mark.
I'd have a hard time imagining exactly what I'd want from one game to the other.
Yeah,
that would make sense at least, you know.
What comes to mind for me would be like sort of like 80s, 90s comic books fantasy, where it's like it's a fantasy world, but it's actually like a like space colony that like fell apart or something. So you can find like laser guns and swords, like something like that could be cool. So I'm not ruling anything out, but it would almost have to be like its own game.
And a lot of people do really like the melee in 5 leagues. So you see that transporting well to 5 parsecs.
Yeah, system stuff could happen. I guess I'll throw this as a bonus answer. That because people will ask about that a lot because they'll see one thing and they'll like it, or they'll ask like, why is it different in one game versus the other? And sometimes there's like a practical reason. Like in 5 leagues, it's a fantasy game. You're mostly fighting with swords, so the hand-to-hand fighting has to be like more exciting and more involved. In parsecs, it's meant to be like more of an exceptional thing, so it's just like one opposed roll and then you're down. And sometimes it's just because I want to try something different. So like a couple of people have asked why morale is different. In 5 leagues, it's just morale checks always fail on a 1 or 2, and in 5 parsecs you have like a morale value of each enemy. And it's literally just because I wanted to try it a different way. Like there was no master plan.
Let's see what happens. All right. So next question from Facebook 5 Leagues group. Oh, 2 questions.
Oh, 2 for 1.
What's next in the World of 5 series? And 2.
Oh, we got an official name that isn't 5 core now. I like that.
5 series.
Yeah.
Have you considered partnering with a miniatures maker to make a dedicated line of minis for your games?
Question 2 we've already answered. I would love to, but I would be like a really demanding jerk. So it would have to be like really cool. For the question 1, I think we've actually answered both of these. So yes, there are 2 games being considered or being done, worked on, whatever. One is a specifically 5 parsecs game. It'll be a standalone game, but it'll kind of like exist alongside, and you will be able to move characters from between From Home, Buck Hunt, and the unnamed new game. The other thing will be a completely separate thing, but it will use some of the same game mechanics.
First question, or the second part of the question, though, if you could envision anyone making miniatures like the multi-parts.
Oh, this is the kind of question
who do you think could do it?
So this is where we get to start like an internet rumor.
Yeah. Who could do such a thing?
With the caveat that I'm a 15mm gamer, I think the only answer, honestly, would be like Kuro-san. Because they have such a huge array of like weird and wild sci-fi minis, and they're definitely like this. I don't want to like upset anyone by saying they're better than everybody else, but they definitely have like really high quality stuff. And I think people are into the sort of like tall, kind of oversized 15mm that they do. So I think, yeah, the most likely would be Kuro-san. But because this is the internet, I will be a weirdo and say it should be Pike armor, and it will be a 3mm range.
I know at least one person in Discord will be happy with that answer.
I know. Official 3mm 5 parsecs figures. Mark the basis.
The next question comes from Something Awful.
Hey,
You've been
you people are
transparent.
awful.
I don't think I've ever been there to Something Awful. I was surprised to see questions from there.
Yeah, they do a little, it's more RPG stuff, but they do have a small miniatures crowd.
Okay. You've been transparent about your media and gaming influences. Was the universe in 5 parsecs developed specifically for the game, or is it part of a personal world building you've done in the past? RPG campaigns, daydreams, etc.
Yes, it was developed specifically for the game, and then it just once I started, I'll be honest, originally it was kind of just intended to like provide like it just felt like if I was doing a sci-fi game, you have to put like some background. But then I kind of like got into the idea that now it's like its own thing, and I'm working on like a big setting guide and stuff. So it was developed as a gaming setting. And then it kind of got a little life of its own. And I'll expand like a little bit more and say that a lot of it obviously is this kind of mix of like a lot of things that I thought was really cool. I think a lot of times, like, like the backgrounds, like Warhammer 40K and stuff like that. That's all like really well documented, 2000 AD comics, and Judge Dredd, and Dune, and Star Wars, and all that stuff. Like, anything that's like from like kind of like the 70s, 80s era. But I grew up in like, I was born in 80. So my like getting introduced to stuff was basically throughout the 90s. You're like the same age I am, I think. So yeah, like our experiences are a little different. We were getting like the tail end of that, like Aliens, stuff like that. We got that. But the things that really was influential for me in sci-fi, a lot of it was just kind of like, like 16-bit like video games and stuff I got involved with later. Like I've been pretty transparent that I'm a massive Mass Effect fan, and that came out, when I was an adult. So some of it with the setting was honestly trying to capture some of those influences that nobody was really talking about, because a lot of the like foundational people in sci-fi games are all like they were born in the 60s or the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It was a way of pulling up some of those things. For me it was playing XCOM and Quake and Alien Breed on the Amiga, or stuff like that. Battle Isle.
So mostly daydreams then. How does this
a
all
lot of
work
daydreams?
together?
Yeah, a lot of daydreams. Paying homage a little bit, and yeah. But to answer the original question, yes, it was developed as a game setting.
Facebook 5 parsecs group. Will you be releasing the World War I trench raid rules previously hinted at?
Yes, I will. I am going through and hacking them down a little bit because I think I got a little carried away with some of the fiddliness. The purpose of the rules, they will be a little more detailed and a little more... There's this trend in wargaming right now that it's almost like a bad thing to be gear focused on like weapons and weapon details. And I wanted to like poke my nose at that a little bit. So there will be some detail with like different machine guns of different characteristics and stuff. But I think I got a little too carried away with the fiddliness. The version that exists right now is basically playable. You can play through a full battle, it'll be fine. But I do want to make some changes to it. But yes, it's still an active project. There are some scope questions I'm trying to decide like how much to really do for just the base book. Because you can get carried away, if you're trying to cover like, like at one point I was writing on my notepad like, cover 1904 to like 1920, and it gets really crazy once you get that far.
I just imagine that half the book is based on the show chat.
It could be. I am a Francophile, so.
So the next question also comes from Facebook 5 parsecs group. Will there be any more Starport Scum things? Which I think we know.
Yeah, so if there is, it will be a new edition. And the vision I have is it'll streamline some things, adjust the game a little more to how people ended up playing it, and then take a lot of the expansion material and fold it into the main rules. Something I would love to do, but I don't know when. There will probably not be more expansion material for the current edition. At this point, I think I would rather like update the game and then see what expansion material will look like. Also, Starport Scum precedes like 5 parsecs as a thing. Compared to its current thing. It's funny because like the races, I needed some sample like aliens and Starport Scum, and they're the same because they originated as these fantasy archetypes I developed. So the race is already there, but it's not specifically set in like unified space or anything. And I don't know, it would be tempting if I redid the game to do it in unified space, but maybe it should just be kind of a generic like, space opera. I don't know.
Fun fact. Starport Scum was the first game I bought from Nordic Weasel Games.
Hey!
And I went with it because people said that 5 parsecs was too convoluted, because I think it was the first edition still.
Yeah, that was probably true, because you had to like flip between two books, and it was, yeah. But then when I simplified it, everyone complained about that.
That's when the magic happened.
Yeah.
So, the next question comes from Something Awful. Any plans for more detailed rules for space combat? It would be cool to break out Starship miniatures and play a space-based tactical round.
Yeah, space combat in 5 parsecs from home. I know a lot of people ask about that. The problem is I don't know if that's something that would be all that much fun when you actually get to do it. Because in the end, you're putting your like 80 credit like ship at risk of being blown apart if you have like crap dice for a session. A 5 parsecs Starship game is something that has been discussed, probably in the context of like flying like patrol missions as like a Unity fleet, like flight officer, or even like as a fleet commander, carrying out different missions and having like a whole procedural campaign around that. So, could a 5 parsec space battle game happen? Yes, probably. Question mark. For 5 parsecs from home, I know a lot of people want it. So if I can find a way of making it cool, I promise I'll do it. But at the moment, I'm not sure I know what it should look like. Like boarding actions or some like table based, like you can send your ship out and go explore and stuff. That might happen sooner.
But no, like ship to ship. You take
Yeah,
your
like
retired scout vessel and hoping for the best.
yeah, like I said, probably not. But if I figure out a way of like that, I can make it cool, then I'll give it a shot.
So, to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the next question comes from Reddit. Do you see yourself adding more role-playing elements to the 5-star games, or 5 asterisk games, at any point, or do you see these as war games first and foremost? 5 Leagues seem to add a few RPG sequel elements, though I would probably consider it to be more of a war game. I ask because solo RPGs seem to have been gaining some traction the past few years, and even my interest in them was partially fueled by discovering 5 parsecs and realizing, what else can you play solo?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's something we've talked about on the Discord a few times. To me, because there's a fair amount of these, what I call warband games now, where you have a group of characters and they have progression and you fight, things, and they are often solo. And I think a lot of these games are trying to be an RPG. Like, when we talk about in the Discord, a lot of times we'll talk about like Rangers of Shadow Deep feels a lot like you're playing someone's RPG campaign. You're having, like a big set piece battle, and to me, leagues have always been intended as a war game. So it's one of the things, especially earlier on, people would often ask, like, hey, it doesn't make sense to my story that I'm fighting like all these different like weird monsters. They don't have anything connection. But to a war gamer, it was very important to me that you can fight all these different enemies. You have more variety on the battlefield. So a lot of things like that. So to me, leagues have always been a war game. That being said, I am very interested. I really like games where you have a game where you're playing a miniatures game, but you have a game master and you can kind of act more free form. It's very sort of like classic style of minis gaming that I think has gotten like forgotten a little bit. So I would love to do like a game mastering book for like having game master scenarios and stuff. And I think that's something the overlords might be interested in. So. So to answer the question, like, yes, Leagues is intended to be a war game, or a miniatures game, rather. It's not really about war, right? But yes, I would love to do more like RPG-ish stuff. At least like RPG elements. I think that's what the question really is about.
Mm-hmm.
So full-on RPGing in the 5 Leagues world, probably not. I would love to do a 5 parsecs role-playing game, but there's questions about what the system would look like.
Yeah, that's another topic entirely, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's a whole, like a whole 250-page book, and you have to like be a lot more with the setting and stuff. So yeah.
Well, maybe in time we'll see it though.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next question comes from Reddit. Will 5 parsecs have support for Theater of the Mind play? I wish it would, since it would be nice to play with practically no visual field at all, just near zones, far zones, etc. By the way, I just got to say that 5 parsecs from home, is awesome.
Well, I'm glad you like it, dude. So you can actually answer that question because Absolutely. You have tested the non-miniatures rules. They will be in expansion 2. But yes, so expansion 2 will have rules for playing without miniatures at all. And the best thing is it will still use the normal combat system. It's not like it is abstracted out, but you're still like your characters matters. And on top of that, expansion 3 will actually have a more granular sector movement system. So there will be, you will have options. The non-minis rule are basically theater of the mind. So yeah, I think we can answer this one in the affirmative. And after 20 questions in a row, which have all been variations, well, maybe, I'm happy to be able to say yes, dude, you're getting exactly what you want.
It is already here. Yeah, no, it's pretty fun. I guess if I could only wish for one thing, it'd be have more advantages. Because a lot of the equipment I had, I wasn't able to use.
Yeah, so that's a difficult part with stuff like that because so much of the items and equipment is tied into the specific, it's a miniatures game, right? And so it's one of the, you kind of have two choices. You can either go through all of that stuff, you can give it a new function, and then it gets really unwieldy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you have to say well, I hate to say it, but this item you have just kind of isn't going to do anything in this kind of environment. So that's just kind of the choice you have to make on it. And the original intention of it was, and a couple of people who got it from Patreon have mentioned, they used it to play in a hotel room or something. I was okay, yeah, that's exactly what I had intended. So, but yeah, so with the non-minis rules, you can literally play on a piece of paper.
Yeah, a couple pieces of paper if you keep them track.
Yeah, you need a little bit. The sector movement still uses a table and terrain. Ooh. It just lets you move kind of from sector to sector, and then it uses the normal movement system when you're close to the enemy.
Okay, interesting.
So, but yeah, this guy gets what he wants.
All right, next person, Reddit. Any thoughts about a sequel or parallel game set in the 5 Parsecs universe? Well, I guess we know the answer to that one.
Yes, it is coming. It'll be really rad, and it'll be it'll be cool. It will have a bunch of. So I'm actually going to say, don't read the second part of the question because what he's saying is almost exactly what it's going to be about, and I don't want to reveal it yet. So if you're the guy who asked that question on Reddit, you're getting exactly what you're asked for. So that's 2 in a row who got what they wanted.
Hooray!
Well, they will, in the future, like Christmas.
Yeah. All right. Another Reddit answer or question. What else is in the pipeline that you're currently working on that you're able to discuss? We covered that one. Are there any new settings or expansions we look forward to? Is able to tease? We've been teased. Any genres, games you'd want to work on at a future date?
Ooh, okay. So that's the one where I get in trouble. All right. So we've definitely teased. I've shown my ankles. Everyone's gotten hot and bothered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as much as I think I'm able to discuss. On my personal, the non-Overlord side, like I said, I'm working on an update for Trenchhammer, and I am also working on the World War I skirmish rules. And after that, I know there's a couple of projects to do, including some RPG-ish stuff. So we'll see. But I'm trying to be better these days about not, because a lot of times what would happen is I would talk about something I'm working on, and then it falls through, or I get stuck on it, or I decide that it's not what I had in mind was going to work out, and people get kind of upset about it.
And they keep saying FKPS over and over again.
Yeah, sometimes it just becomes it becomes part of the culture. But yeah, sometimes I don't want to get people upset. Genres and games I would want to work on a future date. So that's a dangerous question, right? I know I want to do a ship game, probably World War II or World War One, because the only ship game I played that I enjoyed was Victory at Sea, which all the serious ship gamers really don't like. So, and I played a couple of other ones, but none that I really like that much. So I always wanted to try and make that if I can figure out how to make it work. I really want to do World War One airplanes, biplanes. I had to be a cool campaign game where you have to fly missions and you have to fight the Bosch in your little propeller plane and stuff. That would be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if so I have a couple ideas. We have talked. I talked to my wife actually that it would be cool to do a gothic horror monster hunting game. But I wondered Silva Bayonet or what was that the one that came out recently where you fight monsters and undead and stuff?
I know Silver Bayonet's in that range.
Yeah, I don't know if that stole the thunder.
Night Watch, maybe.
There's been a couple.
Todorov?
It was. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. And I'm 2 beers in, so.
Still.
But yeah, something like that would be cool. And there's some definite ideas. I would love to do the spaceship game that everyone has been asking me about for 5 years. So yeah, there are definitely things I would love to work on. I think it's no secret that I'm a big World War One nerd, and I have this vision of doing a whole game covering like every aspect of the war. So that's like super niche. So I also have to find some stuff people will actually like pay for and play.
That's Patreon funded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then from Reddit, are there any plans to complete 5 kilometers from Leipzig? So how do you say it?
Yes,
Leipzig? Leipzig?
Leipzig.
Leipzig.
Well, okay, so I'm Danish and speak like 8 words of German, so that's the best I can do.
Maybe just need to say it
Yes,
angrier.
Leipzig. So yes, the problem with that is that I set it up to be like there's really generic things you play, like army dudes or cowboys or criminals, and then I realized that that's like impossible to build a campaign for. So I'm trying to decide. I know a lot of people would love like a cowboy game, like Wild West. That's lets you focus in on like a more narrow range. I would also love to do like like sharp rifles kind of thing, where you playing like an infantry like unit and you get to like go on patrols and stuff. So yeah, I would love to complete it, but I need to figure out like what the focus will be because it has to be focused more than it currently is. Otherwise, it's very difficult unless you write like a really generic campaign. But I don't think that's what people want. So I'm probably most inclined to do like a Napoleonic thing, which was the original idea. So it will be cool. One thing I've always wanted to do was do this thing where you could play like you pick like like you're the British light infantry, like in sharp rifles, and you get to play out like the entire like Napoleonic Wars.
Hmm.
So yes, I would love to complete it, and there are plans, but I don't know what. I haven't decided on those plans yet.
The next up from Reddit, is there any plans for an updated 5 Men from Kursk or something else World War II related?
Kursk, possibly. The main problem there is that I don't have a lot of things I would want to change. Kursk came out like pretty well, and that was like the culmination of the like 5 core era of like designs. So it kind of like crystallized everything I wanted it to be. So the problem with that, if there was an updated version, what I would probably want to do is I have access to more research now on like tanks and guns and campaigns and stuff. Like put more effort into that stuff, and probably like expand the amount of campaigns you could play. Or maybe do more. I did like a little expansion for like playing the Polish campaign, and I have a couple like fan submissions I've been sitting on, unfortunately, because I just haven't had the time to work them out. But it would be cool if you could have these like detailed campaigns where you could play through like again like the whole war, and it'd be really rad. So yeah, I would love to. But the problem with a updated Kursk specifically, unless it was just a facelift, is that I just don't know what I would do with it that would justify like a new edition. And I don't want to just like change the look of it and then like it's that. Something else World War II related? Question mark. It's more likely if I do another historical game, it's more likely to be either World War One or 19th century, but never say never.
Solid maybe.
Yeah. Question mark.
Next question from Reddit. As someone who loves war story, have you ever thought of revisiting the game or concept? Yes, you did.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that earlier. So I'm about halfway through a revisit of it. I'm just kicking around a few different things, whether to use a D10 instead of a D6. And just since I have more understanding and more experience with Matrix games now. But yes, War Story will probably get... I'm not sure. Like I said, this is definitely like a vanity project. Because it didn't sell very much because it was so weird and it won't sell that much again. But yeah, I am working on that.
They also have a bonus question.
Oh.
Any updates on a potential second edition of Usurper? And if you are working on it, would you keep the base fantasy setting or switch to being explicitly genre agnostic?
So unexpectedly, my good friend Bill went through the entire thing and fixed like a bunch of bugs and wording problems and did what he usually does.
Bill is correct.
Almost anything. Yes, Bill is always correct. And Bill always corrects. So yes, a second edition of Usurper is much more likely, and I do have some tweaks that I have intended for it, changing some of the stuff. My gut feeling would be to keep the fantasy setting, although it would be very tempting to make it a generic game. I know a lot of people have wanted to see like a sci-fi version of it. And I'll throw in a little bonus here, because a lot of people, even though Usurper ended up as kind of like well-suited as a solo game, that was never entirely the intention. It was always intended to be played with a GM. But then like everyone who played it solo, and it's like, okay, I guess it's a solo game now. I'm good with that.
Solo guy makes solo games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing.
All right. So next question also comes from Reddit.
All right.
So right now you've got 5 games for fantasy, sci-fi, post-apoc, and World War II. Are you planning any new 5 games in other settings? Covered that basically.
Yes. Beyond what has been discussed already, not at the moment. No. Mostly because there are things I'm interested in beyond that. As mentioned, like the black powder stuff, Napoleonics, and things like that. But it also becomes a question of like how much I can reasonably spend my time. Probably not any new settings beyond like Napoleonics or other, maybe American Civil War or something like that. But yeah, probably not new settings.
All right. And of course, the last question is the most important from Reddit. Any plans for Weasel-Tech in the near future?
Near future, a couple of small expansions while I'm working up to. There's for Weasel-Tech, it's more like a feature list. There's a lot of things that people that either I want to do or that people have asked for. So some of the things are like everyone wants like more social stuff, especially like they want to be able to like meet their enemies and like fall in love with them and do the macro thing. Everyone wants like transforming mecha, of course.
Of course.
And some space stuff. So yes, there are plans. It'll probably be in a series of like smaller expansions. I just did the Basilisk one, so you can fight like organic enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And like slightly tougher enemies. So some of it will be like that, I think, where it'll be like, oh, here's a new military operation that's happening in this world, and then you go do that, and that'll add new options. But yes, there are plans, but they're very Weasel-Tech is fun to write for because you can just kind of rely on like you can openly rip off like anime and stuff, and people will like thank you for not being original. So it's fun to write, but it means I don't plan it like that strenuously ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's fairly untapped in the miniatures market.
Yeah, surprisingly, you wouldn't think so, but
we're moving on to the topic of hobbying now.
Hey.
Yeah, so this one comes from Discord. What are some tabletop war games you played recently, and what are your thoughts on them? What are some of your all-time favorites? And are you able to play your own games for fun outside of playtesting?
Oh, that's a 3 for 1.
Mm-hmm.
So question 1, tabletop games I have played recently. So I'm going to take this to mean miniatures games because most of what I've been playing recently has been like Hex and Counter like war games. So the last minis game I played was Contemptible Little Armies, which is a World War I game. Some Stargrunt 2, and a small bout of Warzone First Edition. And this may make me sound like not very hip and in tune with the kids these days, because I think the newest of these games are like 20 years old. They were all great. Stargrunt 2 is a game I played on and off basically since probably for like 18 years or something. And it's a great, it was kind of like, it was an eye-opener for me as a younger player, because it was the first game I played that tried to be like a serious military game, but without being like super tedious and stupid. It was actually like playable by humans. Warzone is kind of, there's a joke with the Warzone curse, or the Mutant Chronicles curse, because every version of the game like ends up folding very shortly. So I still mostly play the original, like super broken first edition. And Contemptible Little Armies is a pretty decent World War I game. It needs a little updating, but it's fun. It's fun. Unfortunately, I haven't played anything that's like super recent. Yeah, that's just kind of the nature of it. I don't tend to. Not because I'm like too good to play like games others people make, because I love playing games. I love playing everything. But I don't tend to buy miniatures games that have like bespoke miniatures lines. Like I want to use stuff I already got, and if they're miniatures for the game, I want to buy them because they're really cool, and not because like that's like the specific unit. And nowadays, like most new, like especially the sci-fi games, are all like bespoke minis. I just don't tend to like buy into them. Oh, I did play some. What is it called? Like Fire Team, the like half-size kill team game Games Workshop did.
Oh,
so and both me and my kid absolutely love that. That is so good.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll chill for that. It's funny because like in indie gaming, there's always like this idea you have like kind of shit on Games Workshop, and I'm not like super into 40K anymore. I don't think it's a good game, but I will chill at least a little bit for them. But yeah, like Fire Team is super, super good. And from what I understand, Kill Team is also quite good. So yeah, Kill Team A+. The other games are like really old. You can download Stargrunt 2 from Ground Zero Games website. They give away the PDF for free, and it's pretty good.
An amazing photocopy of a PDF.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it gets pretty grungy. some all-time favorites. Again, that's going to show my age. It's going to be like Warzone First Edition, StarCraft 2, the second edition of Warhammer 40k. That's like my era. And Crossfire, which is a World War II game that has its whole thing is that there's no measurements. You just move until you get hit by fire or reach a terrain feature. So those are my like all-time favorite games. If I'm just putting something on, I used to play a lot of 5150 and Nuts from 2 Hour War Games. And that's probably what I've like by like number of plays is either Warhammer 40k second edition or like 5150.
It's amazing that you were able to play it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we learned to play from the original like first edition of Nuts, and we sat down to play and we gave up, and then we came back like next week and we tried again and we finally got it. And once it clicked, we were like hooked. But it was definitely like they're a lot easier now. Now they have like diagrams and clippings and stuff. But yeah, that early book, that was it took a bit for us to get our heads around it. But it was, I will say this, it was a game that got my friend Brandon at the time. He was a role player and he liked board games. But he had previously no interest in miniatures games at all, and that game just got him into it.
Ooh.
So
yeah, the reaction system is very interesting. So I can understand.
Yeah, it was. That was the thing. It was very like vivid. Like it felt very cinematic. Things were happening. For the last part of the question, are you able to play your own games for fun? Yes, I am, but I don't usually play anything I'm currently working on. So like I don't play 5 Parsecs for fun right now because if I'm doing something, it's because I'm testing out like a character or something. So right now, if I'm playing some of my own stuff, it's usually like 5 Core or something because it's or Stormhammer. Because it's stuff I can just put on and not like think about it. Once it starts being too involved, it starts like your work brain starts kicking in. And I start thinking like, oh, I should like change how the target numbers work, and then it's not fun anymore.
Yeah, I imagine so if I'm super hard to be able to play your own game and not think about all the things you want to change on it.
Yeah, so it's part of why I don't talk about my own miniatures gaming online a lot because I have to like try and keep them separate. Otherwise, it ends up being like difficult for me. So yeah, if I'm playing for fun, it is usually either Warhammer or 5 Core, and it is super, super like improvised and like loosey goosey. But yes, I do.
Full dinos on the table.
Okay.
All right. So the next question comes from Facebook 5 Leagues group. Do you play our games for fun? We
talked
about extensively.
The same question.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
What are the games you enjoy?
So we've already started that. I guess since it's the 5 Leagues group, I don't play any other like warband fantasy games. I do really, really like the Games Workshop Middle Earth strategy game. I don't even know what it's called anymore. But that one's really cool, the Lord of the Rings one. Although I'm such a like dope, because what I have is like the original books that were released with the like movie box sets back in the day. And I just got the books for like a couple of dollars from like Noble Knight, and I've just been playing those. So I really like that game, and I love the scenarios. It's really good. But I have no clue what that game like looks like now. If you're playing like the updated rules and stuff,
I've never heard anyone say they played the game and don't like it.
No, it's honestly one of those like. Yeah, most people who say they don't like it are just like bitter like Warhammer dorks, or they're people who didn't play it. Like it's just fun. And I mean, I guess if you're like super not into Lord of the Rings, then you wouldn't like it. But yeah, it's a great game.
Let's see. All right, the last question in this hobby section from Discord. You have to play one game as one faction from across any war game, ignoring rational problems like balance or making any sense. What is the one game and what is the one faction you choose? So you can mash it up.
Okay, so the faction and the game don't have to be like the same.
No.
I think. Okay. That is a great question. If I had to just pick a faction from any war game, I think my choice would be the from Warzone / Mutant Chronicles, Bauhaus, which are basically like space Prussians. Because they look cool. They have like blue uniforms and armor, and they have like cool rifles that don't make any sense. It's cool. And they're like, you get to play like angry militaristic Germans, but they're not like Nazi scumbags, so it's fine. And then play them in any game. So in any game other than Warzone, I guess I would take them to a Warhammer battlefield and see how they do, like taking on like somebody's Chaos Army. With their machine guns and stuff. So that would be my pick. Bauhaus from Mutant Chronicles versus your Warhammer stuff.
Sweet.
Get German.
I think that's why they created one-page rules, honestly.
You could there is probably an actual argument for it. Way back in the day, do you remember a Vor Into the Maelstrom by FASA?
Mm-hmm.
So there was this rumor on their mailing list at the time that they had a deal with Target Games, and they were going to do a book, and it would give you Warzone stats for all the Vor armies, and it would give you Vor stats for all the Warzone armies, and it never happened. Because FASA closed down and war was discontinued and has never come back. But it was always like the coolest thing. Like, oh my gosh, I can play like Neo-Soviets versus like Abital or Bauhaus or something. It would be so cool.
Yeah.
And the war background was like, because it was this thing of like worlds just get like pulled in. So it was always set up like you could play anything. Like we were kind of into that, and then the game just died.
Yeah, it's the rifts.
Yeah.
The rifts effect.
So actually, I'm going to amend my answer there because it'll be like Chaos Space Marines versus Bauhaus using War as the rule system. There we go.
Sweet. Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Hell yeah.
All right, so we're moving on to personal questions now, which is the last section.
So we have the meat, potatoes, gravy. What is this, like the garnish on the side? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
The tiramisu. All right, the first most important question from Reddit. Why always 5?
Brand recognition. I think I said like in the very first question, it really just stems from 5 Men in Normandy, and that was called that because you're supposed to play half a squad, and especially historical gamers always play like bigger armies than you're supposed to, and I knew the system was only meant for like a handful of men, so I wanted to prevent people from trying to play like a whole battalion, so I put it in the title. It's 5 Men in Normandy, like don't up, guys. And then it just stuck around. So 5 parsecs from home was just like a cool. I wanted to keep the 5 part because then it was tradition, and it was just like a cool, like it sounded like it could have been like a sci-fi novel when I was like a kid. So then it became a thing. Like if it uses the 5 parsecs engine, it's always like 5 distance units from some location, and if you use a 5 core, it's 5 men and then their location. That's a logic to it.
That's the secret code.
Yeah. Nothing more to it than that. And also, it's just like brand recognition. Now it's just like 5x from Y. It's become like a thing. Right?
Absolutely. People know it.
Heck yeah.
All right. Next question, also from Reddit. Ivan, you wrote so many amazing games that I wonder, do you still have time to play? So we covered that. You were a pioneer in narrative solo games. What are your views about solo gaming versus playing with others? And there's a second part of the question as well. Are there any other contemporary game designers that you would like to point out as particularly innovative? Thanks for all the games.
Hey, you're so welcome. Do I still have time to play? Yes, I do. But like I mentioned earlier, I'm usually not playing whatever I'm actively working on. So, and I do enjoy playing other games. What are my views on solo gaming versus playing with others? That's really interesting because solo gaming on one hand, it's always kind of been there. You can get these old books from like the 80s that talk about like how to solo game like war games campaigns. But like as a real thing, I don't know if there were others who were like really pushing it before like the 2-hour war games guy, Ed, did. Like he was big with it. And at the time he was doing it with like the original chain reaction stuff. I don't know that anyone else really was. Maybe there were and it was just out there, but not in like a big way. And not as, I think the difference he did was that he made it like before it was always this thing of like, well, if your group can't play or your best friend is hungover or whatever, you can play on your own. It's fine. But it was always like this, like, oh, okay, like, well, maybe you're kind of a sad loser, right? And I think what Ed like changed about it was like, no, this is like totally legit. Like, this game is almost meant to be played that way, and you can sit down and play, and it's legitimate. You're not a sad loser. Well, you might be sad. I don't know. Like, it's just a game. It's not going to change your life. But I think that did a lot to like push it forward, and that was some of the stuff that I keyed into. Even though the mechanics have nothing in common, but like Knots and 5150 was a big influence on 5 Men in Normandy. Just for taking all of that stuff, the solo approach and the solo viability, and saying, okay, yeah, this is a totally legitimate way to play. And I think for a lot of people, you kind of get like different groups because you get some people who are like, well, I don't have a group, but I still want a game, so I can play solo. And you get some people who are like, well, my group isn't into whatever this is. So I play this on my own, and then I play like the group game. And there are some people who specifically don't want to play with others. They're just, like they're old, grumpy people. They just want to play on their own. So I think it serves a lot of different purposes. I think a lot of people enjoy having something to kind of like tinker with, something, I got an hour to myself. I can put out the minis and I can play a game and, have a good time. And I don't have to we talk a lot on the Discord about like the social solo where you play the game on your own, but then you post about it online or you show people pictures of the game. People will comment on it. And you get that kind of like social vibe where you're interacting with people and you can talk about your games. And, oh man, that was so unlucky. But you're still playing kind of on your own time and you're not like accountable to anybody else. So yeah, I think solo gaming really is like, in a lot of ways, it's its own beast, and I think it has to be treated as its own thing. Are there other game designers? So it's just contemporary, as particularly innovative. I would say, what is the guy who did Rogue? I always get them mixed up. Is it Rogue Planet? That's a really weird one. Let's see.
Andreas?
Spivey or something.
I can never say his
guy
last name.
yeah, that dude. He is like super avant-garde. If there is such a thing as like avant-garde, he did like a football game. He did a game that I couldn't believe didn't like make it big called the Battlefield, which is like a modern like Call of Duty game, like in miniatures, where you can like respawn your fire teams and stuff. It's really cool, and I don't understand why nobody played it.
Can
So
you say
he's
that
like,
title one more time? It just kind of cut out when you said it.
it's called the Battlefield.
The Battlefield.
Yeah, and it's one of those games I just didn't understand. Like, why didn't make it big? Maybe it will now. I hope so. Yeah, so he did like Rogue Planet, which is really like out there. So he is like a really creative, like innovative guy. I think the tendency in miniatures game right now is more towards like workhorse kind of games. Like I think John McCullough, and I don't know how like to say his name, but like that dude, he's written like all the stuff. And he's done some like really cool stuff. With Rangers was a big deal, and but I don't think his focus is less on like pushing, I think, the boundaries of game design, and more like focusing on in like, okay, this is like a really solid like workhorse, like this will make a solid game. He's always done like really well. He's got like a lot of like famous things to his name, so I think the like vibe right now is more of these kind of like solid designs. And I think the standards are a lot higher for like what you can get away with. Like if your stuff is just like jank and barely works, I think people are less inclined to put up with it. So yeah, I'm gonna say Brent Spivey, the Rogue Planet dude. You should all like go check out Rogue Planet. It's wild.
So the next question comes from the 5 Parsecs Facebook group. What are the benefits and drawbacks to providing paid updates through Patreon versus expansions? You provide both, so I'd be keen to hear your insights.
Yeah, that's a good question. So this question I think can be both like updates, like as rulebook updates, and updates as like expansions. With Patreon, there is the advantage you don't have to like market it. Like everyone who's on your Patreon is going to get it, and then that's kind of all you're like accountable to. And I think it means that it can be a little more, one, it can be a little more rough and ready. And two, it can be a little more experimental. You can do something, because your Patreon people are the people who are like, we like your stuff enough, we're just going to throw like a couple bucks at you every month and just get whatever. Like, the Patreon has never promised specific things. You just get a thing every month for each game, right? So you can be, those are people who are like, I think are more into like, oh, we just want to see like whatever weird thing comes out. So you can do more experimental things that are more out there. For expansions, it has to be a little more like marketable, I think. It has to make it a little more, be a little more conventional. The advantage, of course, is expansion do make like more financial sense. If you get 100 people buy an expansion and you get $1 for it, that's $100. And if you do one each month, so I think for a writer, it's important to like diversify like your this is gonna sound like super corporate, like your cash flow, like your sources of income. Like I put stuff up in a war game world and I get money from that. I get some money coming in from Patreon, which are a little different in nature of what those people are getting. I get royalties from the book sales and stuff. You just want to like flesh yourself out. But in my opinion, paid expansions need to be a little more formal and a little more traditional, I think. Whereas with Patreon, you can be a little more like out there because those people are more in tune with what you're doing.
I think that's a solid answer for sure.
I hope so. It's the best one I get.
Yeah, no, who could argue with it? Yeah. So the next question comes from the Squad Hammer Facebook group.
Hey, those are the coolest people.
Why are some rules uniform between similar systems, Parsecs and Borderlands, while others are completely different?
That's a great question. With a couple of answers. One, I'm always like very sensitive to becoming like locked in as like the guy who always does X, because I don't want to do that. But most of the time, it's honestly like the simplest and truest answer is I just like game mechanics, and I am unhappy if I can't create something new. So if I'm at some point, I'll just start piecing together like new game engine that I want to create, and I want to see like what I can do with it. So a lot of times, like we talked about at the very beginning, like a lot of games start with a mechanical idea, and then you build it out to see if like can a whole game hang off of this? Can this like work? Sometimes it's intentional because I want specific things. Something is important to a specific game. And sometimes I just want to do, like a lot of times, even when there are games that are kind of similar, like Parsecs and Borderlands we talked about, a lot of small things are different because they're a lot of times there's just two ways of doing it, right? So you try one here and then you do the other one there, and it helps like make it feel more distinct. I don't know if people like that or if they dislike it. Like it would be simpler if it worked the same. So that's a good question. But yeah, like why is it that way? Mostly because I get bored. And then I justified afterwards by saying, like, well, this situation clearly warrants a different game engine.
Perfect. All right. So next question comes from Discord. What inspired the mini-neutral approach to your games?
Mostly being a hippie. I back in the day, and the Stargrunt was a big part of this, because we came from Warhammer 40k and Warzone to Stargrunt. So the idea that this game said, oh yeah, we have some minis, but you can use whatever you want, that was like really cool to us, and that felt kind of subversive in a way. And then it just like became a big thing for me. So like I said earlier, I always want to play a game where I can use any minis I like, because a lot of times, and you know this, you see miniatures you really like, but it can be kind of discouraging if you can't use them. Like, oh, there's like one squad from this range that's really cool, and I want to get that, but I don't play that game, and I can't use them in this other game. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to like let people use whatever they want. And that's why, like, I try to not, like, there's a lot of, like, creatures and critters that are described in, like, parsecs, for example. But I try to make them, like, vague enough that you can kind of get away with anything. I'm a little more daring with it nowadays, because now, like, once, like, money and fame goes to your head, you can get away with anything, right? Now I can put... so you can put like bird people in a game and everyone scrambles, and it's like, when you're like small and scrappy, you have to be like, well, nobody owns bird people, so I can't put that in the book. I'll just put elves and like barbarians in the book. But once you have like the big money and the big ego, you can be like, all you suckers can go like find bird people. How are you going to do that? You. So,
bird people.
Yeah. And then people find like all these like really cool bird minis and stuff. So it's fine. But yeah, so really it's just like the way I like to play games. And ultimately, like a lot of what I do is stuff that's like, like if I'm a little like polishing my own Halo, a lot of it is like, oh, I wish gaming was like this. And, the advantage of writing games is you get to make it the way you wanted it to be, at least like a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have you ever seen that old Games Workshop miniature? It's a wizard with a chainsaw.
No, that sounds, is that like an old hammer, dude?
Oh yeah, it's very old hammer. You just look at it,
some of those are like,
what am I gonna do with a wizard with a chainsaw?
Well, what you do is you write a game where you're gonna need a wizard with a chainsaw.
Obviously.
Like that dude.
Squad hammer.
Chainsaw. You would fit in Squad Hammer, but Chainsaw Wizard would be a great game title.
Oh yeah. Chainsaw Wizard.
Hell yeah.
All right, so the next question comes from Discord as well. What genre of game/setting would you like to do a game for, but haven't found the kind of mechanic for?
Space battles or naval battles. And since most space games are just naval games, that's the same thing. Yeah, those. Like I said, I want to do like an air game, but I have a good idea of how that should work. Naval stuff, like I said, I haven't been all that happy with the games I played. So I'm still waiting to figure out like how I would do it and how it would look and work. So yeah, that's my answer.
Great. And from Discord, if you were starting all over, knowing what you know now, is it better to make your first game your labor of love or go for something possibly more people would enjoy?
So this is the one where like everyone is going to try to like dodge the actual question and say, well, you should find a labor of love and then you'll be rewarded in life, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to take the question as meaning like those two are mutually exclusive. The thing you really love to do is not that popular, and the thing that's really popular, you're not. So we're going to make it like the harder one.
Yeah.
I'm going to be practical and say you could do either. But I think you're going to be happier if you do the labor of love. But happiness is overrated because you can buy happiness. And secondly, the first game you make is not going to be all that great unless you're just amazing. So don't do your labor of love first. Do something else first. It should still be something you're into, but you can be practical with it. If you're a little bit into like World War II skirmishing, you can do a World War II skirmish game and get some attention that way. And once you have the experience, because it's not just game design, it's also how to market a game, how to interact with customers or players, how to like iterate the game once it's created. Once you have those skills, you can go back to your labor of love and you can actually do it, and it will be much better. So Yes, make your first game something that you are into. Like, don't write shit you don't care about. It'll be obvious to everybody you didn't care. But don't be afraid of being like a little pragmatic with it as well. Save the good stuff for when you can do it justice.
So you would have started with a Dice Fight and Street Fighter all over again.
You know what? That's where everyone should start. Get a Nintendo Power with Street Fighter moves and start there.
Perfect.
And now we're down to the last 5. So
Absolutely.
Hey. So we'll have a countdown. Number 5.
Discord. You have several days set aside for just gaming. What goes on the table?
So right now it would be board games because I've been solo gaming Der Weltkrieg, which is a big like World War One hex and counter game. So I've had like a whole week. I would just like play all that.
Ooh.
If it is miniatures and I have several days, that seems to me like I would do some sort of project that I don't normally like get to do. So now we just got a huge table. I actually have like a Warhammer sized table now.
Oh.
Like six by 3.5 feet, so it's almost there. So I think I would I would talk the kid into it, and I would do like a second edition 40K campaign that we would make up and we would play with our armies. That's what I would do.
Nice.
But so if it was miniatures, it would probably be Der Weltkrieg, and I would just like pretend to be a Prussian officer like for a whole week. That'd be cool.
I guess you could say you always have days set aside just for gaming.
That is true. And now that is true. But I assume this means like, for recreation. But now I also have a big enough table where like my wife can use part of the table. I can still have like a game set up, so I can have it set up and I can play like a turn every night or something. So I've actually been doing a lot more gaming since I got that table.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. You get the space, you get the games.
Heck yeah. Number 4.
Number 4, Facebook 5 Leagues. So we covered the first part. Your thoughts on Ranger Shadow Deep and Joseph McCulloch.
Mm-hmm.
You think he's pretty solid? The next question is kind of interesting. Is it a friendly relationship between the various game designers / companies, or is it rather competitive?
By and large, it is very friendly. Sometimes surprisingly so. Not that I expect it to be especially cutthroat, but in my experience, you're going to find 2 kinds of people. Mostly. One is people who aren't really online a lot. They don't talk online a lot. They don't have a lot of presence. They mostly just handle their stuff for like a publisher. And the second group of people who are like fairly online, and from my experience, almost all of them are like super eager to talk and help you out. Like when I was starting out, I remember talking to, again, like Ed from 2 Hour War Games, and he was like, yeah, here's like, he gave me a bunch of advice. He even offered me like free advertising space in one of his games, for like a direct competitor. And I didn't take him up on it because I was being proud, I guess. But he was like, yeah, whatever. And in turn, like, a while ago, he emailed me with some questions about how to do something. He was like, yeah, here's like my experiences with it. So, I've had like small deals and stuff with different minis companies and things. Like in my experience, at least in the indie space, everyone is like super friendly and super cool. I'm sure out there's like weird drama and stuff, personality clashes and things like that. But in my experience, at least, for minis, it's much more like friendly than maybe on the RPG side of things, where you kind of get like flicks and.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I don't think it's especially competitive. There's a couple of guys out there who are kind of competitive, and like that's their thing. That's fine. But I've never like in the wargaming space. I don't know that I've ever had like a negative interaction with anybody. And again, that's not to say that there are people out there that, you couldn't have had a bad interaction with somebody out there. I'm not vouching for anybody or signing off on anything. But yeah, in my experience at least, it is very friendly and it's pretty open, whether you're like a big yeah. And as far as like Rangers, like I said, John is really like solid dude, and I think he puts a lot of effort and thought into what he makes. I think Rangers is. I think people often bring it up, and I suspect like a lot of people who play Leagues also play Rangers and vice versa, because I think they complement each other very well.
Mm-hmm.
Leagues is more of like an open-ended procedural experience, and Rangers is more like a specific story, and there's ups and downs like both of those. So yeah, there used to be this thing somebody had hacked together. It was like the combat system from Rangers and the scenarios, but it was the League's campaign from the second edition book.
Yeah.
It was wild. Like the dude had done a lot of it. So yeah, in my opinion, Rangers is cool. I have barely like ever played it. I played like one battle of it because I never play. If I'm working on something, I refuse to play or read books and games that are close to what I'm doing because I don't want to. I always think it's better to like get your inspiration from like other things. So I don't, because I do so much 5 Leagues work. I just don't have. I don't like look into Rangers and I played, but I did play it like once, like a long time ago. We had a good time.
Sweet. All right, you ready for number 3?
Number 3.
Discord. What makes Judicator the best modern power metal band?
Oh, this is my friend Andy. So the reason Judicator completely kicks is that and this is somewhat rare in American power metal bands, is that they are able to do stuff that is at the surface of it kind of cheesy, singing about like crusades and like Byzantine warlords and stuff, and sound like they absolutely mean every single word of it without being ironic or cringy or like wink wink, this is silly that we're doing this. And that is what makes good power metal. You have to be able to go up on the stage with like armor and a sword and your guitar and absolutely sing about elves and unicorns like you absolutely believe every word of it. Otherwise it doesn't work and you just become lame. All the like ironic like humor power metal bands suck. And that is why Judicator is the best modern power metal band.
Well, I don't think anyone can argue with that.
Oh yeah.
Number 2. Facebook 5 Leagues group.
Hey.
Which would win in a fight to the death? A grizzly bear or a silverback gorilla?
Ooh. This is one of those things where you could like take the stats from like an RPG and you could like battle it out. I feel like, well, these are both like super strong animals, but we were at the zoo the other day and they had grizzly bears, and just seeing those things like lumber around the rest is just immensely terrifying. They're just like giant death machines with like claws the size of like your arm. So while I think the gorilla can put up a pretty good fight of it, I feel like the grizzly has more ways and opportunities to hurt the gorilla than the gorilla has to hurt the bear. Unless the gorillas are probably like smart, so if it can like trap the bear or like if you use a tool or something. But if I had to put money on it, I would probably put money on the bear. The bear might get effed up pretty bad, but I think he wins.
I think so too.
So I would like 65-35, maybe 60-40, because gorillas can be pretty scary. So yeah. I'll say 60-40.
Just gotta get him in a headlock. Ooh.
Yeah, you know, like it was one of those things we were joking about at the zoo, because we were talking about like, oh, like, people will say like, oh, if I had like a weapon, I bet I could take a bear. Like, no, you couldn't. It would just like, it would just eat your sword or whatever and just eat you. Like, yeah. They're just like death machines.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, number 1.
Number 1, Discord. Are you or are you not actually a mutilate in disguise?
That would be telling, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it is an AMA. Unfortunately, I am a human made of meat, just like the rest of you.
As you've maintained this entire time.
Beep. And that is the last question. That was pretty serious. So I hope anyone who sat through the whole thing, I hope you learned some interesting things. If you didn't, we offer a 100% money-back guarantee.
That's right. Your money goes right back to your pockets.
Absolutely. Then you can spend them on miniatures.
Woo.
Which is what you were going to do anyway, right?
Weasel-branded miniatures.
Yes, absolutely. We do need some 5 parsecs minis. Now people got me like thinking about it.
I want Weasel-Tech minis.
Oh, that would be great too. We do need some anime looking mech minis. Not that many of those.
Yeah.
And those the Kids Logic stuff gets spendy.
Oh yes. CEOcast, it's not that far off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With that, I hope everyone enjoyed the. I was going to say enjoyed the show, but it really wasn't. Enjoyed the interview, I suppose. And thank you so much, Cool Canadian D, for putting this thing together.
And if you do have any more questions for Ivan, just put them in the comments below.
Absolutely, we will do our best to answer them. And I hope everyone has a good whatever time of day this video goes live.
That's to be determined. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Beep beep beep.